Hey, how's it going? Thank you for joining my TedTalk. But before we start, let me take a seat. It's TedTalk, not TedWalk, So, what I wanted to talk to you about today is GroupThink. What it is, why it's negative to group consensus, and why we should avoid it. I'll also provide some ways that we can avoid it at the end of my talk. But first I want to start with the actual definition from the dictionary. So Webster Dictionary defines groupthink as the practice of thinking or making decisions as a group in a way that discourages creativity or individual responsibility. And this is a great definition, but I also wanted to start with a story just to kind of provide some context in a real life situation where I've encountered groupthink myself. So when I first started with my company about 6 months ago, we would have new hire trainings. And after a certain amount of time, I was asked to lead the new hire training just because I had gained some experience and I had an understanding of what went into the trainings as well as what we could do in them, as well as the potential to serve new hires in many ways that it can benefit them. But constantly I would pose the class questions and people would be hesitant to answer. At first, I thought it was just a lack of understanding and people being shy because they were new to the job. But then I suddenly started to realize that people didn't want to be wrong. They feared giving a wrong answer, when in reality wrong answers are fine because that's how you learn. But people would much rather stay comfortable and not give an answer or agree with the majority of the class instead of actually providing an answer. And that really is what groupthink is. It's basically when people would rather agree with the overall group and remain in that group instead of thinking for themselves through critically thinking about the question being posed and providing an answer that may not be the same as everybody else. And this can hurt creativity for a lot of reasons. Basically, another example that I want to provide is when you were growing up in classrooms, teachers would often pose questions to the class and say, raise your hand if you agree with this answer. The whole class raises their hand. During that time, I know myself, I would look around at my classmates to see what they were going to answer. Just because I didn't want to be wrong, I didn't want to stand out, I wanted to seem like I was with the majority of my classmates. That's when teachers would ask us to put our heads down. When we would put our heads down, they would be able to gauge and get an honest answer out of each student because they weren't influenced by anybody else in the class's answers. They were answering for themselves because they weren't able to see actually what everybody else was answering. And that brings me to my next point of some negatives of groupthink. So, groupthink hurts creativity and critical thinking. Basically, people are going to settle for the most comfortable and easy solution just because it was posed to them, rather than actually critically thinking about the question and taking the time to decipher the question and think about the best possible solution or outcome that could come of the question being posed to them. And that brings up why some may think it's positive. So, one way people might think groupthink is positive is because of harmony. If you're not disagreeing with anybody, you're maintaining that harmony within the group and all is well. But in reality, it's really just minimizing the efficiency or effectiveness of your solution. If you're not gonna critically think and challenge other people's questions, then you guys are gonna settle for the simplest answer and not get anywhere with what you're really trying to achieve. Here, let's walk a little bit more. And that brings me to why we must avoid it. So again, this whole video I've been talking to you about why groupthink is so negative, what it actually is, and how it can hurt the overall decision of a group. And basically, one of the main points I want to share with you guys is it hurts critical thinking. Critical thinking is taking a question or a problem, situation, and really assessing it to the fullest. Thinking about every single aspect of it and thinking about what's going to possibly be the best solution through questions, different experiments, different ways of applying it into a real life situation to see how it actually, what the outcome actually is. And then another reason we should avoid groupthink is because it promotes laziness. And I don't mean physical laziness, although it could come to that. I mean laziness within our thoughts. people are gonna just settle for these simple answers, and they're not gonna want to explore further possible solutions or question people even further, because either one, they want to be comfortable, they want to keep that harmony, they don't want to come off as different. Two, they're just being lazy because they've become accustomed to groupthink and just settling for these simple answers that are posed to them and just taking the easy way out, which is to agree. Or three, they really just don't want to question that even further. They don't want to take the time to critically think, and they haven't had the opportunities to train their mind to critically think. So just a simple lack of understanding of groupthink and what it actually is, and not being aware that it might be going around within your team, group, or even workplace overall. And that brings me to my final point. I want to give you guys some ways that you could avoid groupthink. So one possible way to avoid groupthink is to begin thinking about what you would do in possible situations, Like, for example, say a meeting is coming up and you're going to be discussing a certain topic. Think of some certain questions that may be posed during the meeting and how you would react to it without any influence from your group, without their answers. What would your answer be? Have that mindset going into it, and I'm sure that once you go into the meeting, you're more likely to speak your mind and come out with your own opinions instead of agreeing with the group. Number two is question usual outcomes. A lot of times you can guess or have a good idea of what the most basic or the simplest explanation or answer to a question would be. Try to avoid that. If you hear an answer and you think that might be a very usual or predictable outcome, question it. Don't be afraid to branch out and go further and beyond and further question it, because I'm sure that your superiors within your workplace are going to really appreciate that, because groupthink occurs everywhere, and it's a very big focus for workplaces to actually mitigate this and get rid of it out of their workplace and have people become free thinkers, express their creativity, and really express their minds as well. And then my third and final piece of advice for avoiding groupthink is to play devil's advocate. And what I mean by this is basically question people's solutions. So if somebody comes up with a solution, don't be afraid to play that devil's advocate role and question it. Make sure that you're asking questions that really test the durability and flexibility of these answers. And that way you can really get a good sense and gauge how well that answer is and how beneficial it's going to actually be to you and your group. So now what I want to do for you guys is just give you my main 3 takeaways that I would like you to take from this talk. Number 1, groupthink is a negative thing for a workplace, group, or team. It hurts critical thinking, it promotes lazy thinking, and you're not going to get the overall best outcome or solution when people are engaging in groupthink. Number 2 is groupthink may come off as positive, but in all reality, it's not. People want to keep the harmony within a group, and that is very important, but you can establish values from the very beginning of when you start working with a group that can really lay the groundwork and can overall help you avoid groupthink, because then people aren't going to have to resort to just agreeing with all ideas posed to them in order to keep that harmony. People will feel welcome to challenge ideas, welcome to openly communicate with their peers, and overall will be able to get greater outcomes and see these solutions come in that are flexible, durable, and really the best possible solutions that could have came out of that situation. And my third is avoid groupthink. Really practice divergent thinking of your own, and what it means to have your own thoughts. Just because you have your own thoughts doesn't mean that you're necessarily different in a bad way. You're just thinking about things that other people may not be thinking about, and that's the beauty of working in teams. You have different perspectives, different opinions, and when these different perspectives and opinions come together, that's when you really get a well thought out overall great plan or a great idea or a great solution to a problem. I hope you guys enjoyed this TED Talk. I know I did.